His pulse is the only honest thing in this room, and it is climbing. Not from fear.
From me.
A hand closes over the back of his neck, steady, deliberate, the words coming out calmer than they have any right to be. There's a red dot on your forehead. Dance like I just asked you to marry me instead. He does not flinch. Something in that stillness undoes me faster than the gun ever could. A man who has already made peace with dying, holding still anyway, because I asked him to. Behind his shoulder, a light climbs toward his skull with a patience built to outlast me. One song left to decide what kind of woman I am tonight. If you have ever done the dangerous thing calmly, because falling apart was a luxury you could not afford that day, this one is for you. Stay a while. There is a woman here worth understanding. The Munich residence does not host parties. 300 years of gold leaf watch every arrival, deciding who still deserves to stand under it. Exits get counted first, faces second, an old habit that keeps a body upright while the room performs beauty around it. For doors tonight, 2 decorative, 1 fire stair behind a velvet curtain nobody had touched in a century. The dress did its job. Deep green, cut to move, a seam at the thigh reinforced by hand so it would tear clean instead of slow. A blade thin as a hairpin sat under the silk at the hip, close enough to reach, far enough to pass inspection. 60 jobs like this one came before tonight. 60 rooms full of people who mistook money for safety. Names never got learned until a contract closed, a small cruelty performed on purpose so the closing never cost more than it should. Prague taught that lesson, and Prague left plenty of others still unlearned, chief among them how long a client's face stays after his name has already been filed away and forgotten. A waiter passed with champagne nobody drank fast enough. Near the string quartet, a woman laughed too loudly at nothing funny, the particular brittle sound people make when some animal part of them senses the night is about to turn and refuses to believe it yet. Thomas Jefferson stood near the far windows, half a head above everyone around him, the kind of stillness that arranges a room without a single word. Pale hair, paler eyes, a watch worth more than the last 3 contracts combined. A glass he was not drinking from sat forgotten in his hand while people talked at him like water running off stone. Cataloging a target, that was the story being told internally. The eyes disagreed, lingering half a second too long on the line of his jaw before duty dragged them back where they belonged. Static bloomed through the earpiece. Thermal spike, roof line, East Tower. Jackson's voice, flat and fast, arriving the way it always did right before everything went wrong. Windows open. He's acquiring. Running was never an option. Running is a confession. The room got crossed the way it always gets crossed when the walls are about to come down, unhurried, unbothered. A woman greeting an old friend. 5 seconds, Jackson said. Past a cluster of men who smelled like cigars and old money, close now, close enough to see the thread of red climbing Thomas's lapel toward the bridge of his nose with a patience that folded the stomach in on itself.
4.
His guard shifted his weight half a second too late to matter. The space no one was meant to breach opened anyway, cedar and something colder underneath it, something no cologne counter had ever sold. The room had gone strange at the edges the way rooms do right before they end, the chandelier too bright, the champagne too loud in its glasses, every voice folding into one meaningless hum. 3. His eyes found mine and sharpened, not startled, calculating, a predator recognizing another predator, a heartbeat too late to matter. That heartbeat never came. A hand closed over the back of his neck. The other caught his waist and pulled, hard enough to bruise, hard enough that he had no choice but to move or fall. Dance as my husband. The words came against his ear. There is a red dot on your forehead. He went rigid, a man built for control meeting the one thing tonight he could not control. For 1 full second the fight in him looked ready to win, and some ungoverned corner of the mind wondered what that would feel like, his hands instead of his stillness. Then he moved. Not away. Together. The first bar of music took the turn like rehearsal, the red light sliding off his temple to paint the pillar behind them instead, close enough that the marble would remember it longer than either of them would want it to. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he said, low, only for the two of them, his hand finding the small of her back with a grip that had nothing gentle left in it. "Keeping your brains where they belong," came the answer, smiled out for the room like flirting instead of survival. He turned them again, sharper, testing, and the test got allowed because a testing man buys himself time to think, and thinking men survive longer than proud ones. "Who are you?" he asked, and something underneath the question was not suspicion. Recognition, maybe. The particular quiet of a man realizing he was standing across from someone who had already buried a version of herself he had not met yet. "A guardian angel," came the reply, which was almost true and mostly a lie. His jaw tightened. Over his shoulder the light found him again, patient, unbothered by the footwork, and a cold, clean certainty settled in that one song was never going to be enough. "Dip me." "I don't take orders from strangers," he said, even as his arm was already curving to do it. "Do it or watch me let you take it in the spine," and he laughed, one short brutal sound with no humor in it at all, and dipped hard enough that hair swept the floor. The shot came a half-breath later, close enough to feel the air of it split, and glass became 100 small violent stars behind them, a stranger's scream cutting short and going quiet. The orchestra did not stop, so much as it broke. He hauled her upright by the wrist, composure gone in the space of a heartbeat, replaced by something older and considerably less civilized. Down, and both bodies dropped behind an overturned table before he could argue, and for the first time all night, he listened without asking why. His shoulder pressed close in the dark under the linen, both breathing hard, both very much alive. Under the table, hands had gone completely steady, the way they always do once the worst of it starts. That was the part never told to anyone. Not the danger. The relief of it, clean and simple as a held breath finally let go. The one place in this life where nothing was asked except to survive the next 10 seconds. Glass was still falling somewhere above the wreckage of the string section, his shoulders still pressed close, warm where the rest of the night had gone cold, and a particular clarity arrived, the kind that only ever shows up too late, that this had already stopped being a job. The thought got filed away, with everything else not ready to be looked at. There would be time to be furious about it later. If there was a later. Under the linen, in the dark, with the whole city about to come apart above them, something quiet and fierce hoped there would be. The table stopped shaking before the pulse did. His wrist, still caught, told the story first. Steady. Slower than it should have been for a man who had just watched a bullet take someone else's face instead of his own. A king who did not panic even when panic was the only sane response left. Kitchen. Now, before they regroup. He did not argue. That surprised more than the shot had. Past the ruin of a dessert table, past a woman on her knees praying in a language nobody recognized, into a service door that smelled of scorched sugar and cold stone. The residents' kitchens had not been touched by anything modern in decades. Copper pots the size of bathtubs. A floor slick with something better left unnamed. He filled the doorway behind, built for exactly this, ducking under a hanging rack of knives without breaking stride. No wasted movement, no fear making him clumsy. A body that had survived worse nights than this and knew how to carry that quietly. The quiet settled fast, listening past a rushing pulse for the sound that would confirm they were not alone. There it was. Boots. 2 sets, maybe 3, moving with the flat certainty of men who had rehearsed this. "Get behind me," he laughed, short and low, disbelieving. "I'm 900 years old. I'm the one with a gun." And he came anyway, pulled behind the nearest island, which told more about him than the 900 years did. Tactical black came through the swinging doors, faces covered, weapons up. There was no time to find out how good they were. A cast iron pan, still slick with fat, went into the first man's jaw with a full shoulder behind it. He went down screaming, and the second man's reach opened before he could correct his aim. a blade finding the gap under his vest with a precision that used to feel disturbing and now just felt like breathing. Jefferson took the third with his bare hands. Bone broke before the sound of it made sense. He lifted a man twice her weight off the ground and put him through a prep table like it cost nothing. No cruelty in it. Just math. Just a king doing what kept a kingdom standing. The wreckage held both of them a second longer, breathing hard, painted in someone else's blood, saying nothing, because nothing needed saying yet. "Remind me never to critique your cooking," he said, looking at the pan still rolling on the floor. A laugh broke loose, sharp, unplanned, in a kitchen that smelled like copper and fear, and something in his face went softer at the sound of it, and easing around the eyes that had nothing to do with the fight just survived. "I don't cook. I improvise." "Comforting," he said, already moving toward the far door, already trusting the next step without being asked. The freight lift waited at the end of a corridor lined with dead fluorescent tubes, half buzzing, half dark, the light making everything look underwater. Wiring under the call panel gave way without much thought, old habit from a different city, and the doors groaned open on a cage barely big enough for two.
"Get in."
He hesitated. One breath. Long enough to look back. "I don't like small spaces," he said, quiet, like admitting it cost him something he had not planned on spending tonight. "Neither do I." Not entirely true, and the first step in came without waiting for him to watch himself decide. He followed. The doors ground shut with a sound like something being sealed rather than closed, and the corridor noise, the alarms, the shouting, the orchestra still playing 3 floors above against all reason, all of it cut off at once. Trusting silence has never come easily. Silence is where things happen that no one hears coming. This silence was different. Weight to it, his shoulder an inch away in a box built for 1.5 people, the stillness of 2 bodies that had just proven, without saying it, that dying to protect the other beat surviving alone. Hands had stopped shaking. The way you notice a wound gone numb, distantly, dreading the feeling coming back will hurt worse than the injury did. He was watching. Not the door. Not the panel of dead buttons. Her. "You fight like someone who's done this before," he said. "Someone you couldn't save." That went unanswered. Some doors do not open for men an hour ago, king or not, however much some part of me wanted, stupidly, to answer honestly for once in 10 years. The lift shuddered once, and went still. Not moving. Not descending. Stopped, suspended between floors, the red light above the door flickering out, leaving them in a dark thick enough to taste. Neither spoke for a long moment. Then, in a voice stripped of every trace of the composure he had worn all night, he said the one thing nobody had braced for. "I know your handler's name." The whole body went cold in a way the fight never managed. Nobody had told him that name. Nobody had told him anything close to it. Somewhere in that dark, sealed box, the truth landed that neither of them was stuck here by accident. If you have stayed this far, this is not really about the lift. It is about what happens once the noise stops, and there is nowhere left to perform for. Stay through the quiet. This is where she stops being careful. We were sealed inside the only place that threat wanted us to be. The knowledge sat like something swallowed wrong. No moving. Moving would mean deciding what to do with it, and nobody was ready to decide anything yet, standing in the dark with a man who apparently knew more about her own life, tonight, than she did.
"Who told you?"
Voice flatter than it should have been, the way it always goes right before it wants to shake. "Someone who wanted me alive tonight," he said. "I didn't ask why they had that information. I only asked if it was true." "Is it?" His silence answered before he did.
"I don't know," he said.
"That's the truth. I know Jackson has been talking to someone he shouldn't. I don't know if it means what you think it means, and I won't pretend to you that I do." A laugh broke, short and humorless, swallowed almost instantly by the metal walls. "What that likely means is the one person trusted with this life has been selling pieces of it to a stranger." No kinder way to read that. He didn't argue. That, more than anything, said he believed it too. The dark had a texture now, thick and close, smelling faintly of machine oil and something older underneath, stone dust maybe. Centuries of it worked into walls that had buried more secrets than either of them would ever know. A palm found the cold metal beside her and pressed flat against it, grounding herself the way old training taught, in a different country, under a different kind of pressure. Somewhere far above them the orchestra was probably still playing to an empty room, champagne going warm on abandoned trays, the whole gilded evening carrying on without the two people it had almost killed. "Who are you?" he asked again, quieter this time. Not the operative. Not the woman who threw a skillet like she'd trained for her whole life. Who are you when none of that is required of you? Nobody asks that question anymore. Most people stop wanting to know once they see what I'm capable of.
I'm not most people, he said. No.
He really wasn't. A promise made in the car on the way here said the wall would stay up no matter what happened tonight. The job done, the fee collected, gone before anyone got close enough to see the cracks in it. Here, instead, in the dark, already reaching for the one door never opened for clients.
Prague.
He didn't ask what that meant. He waited, the particular kind of waiting that doesn't rush a person toward the parts that hurt. There was a man, a diplomat, younger than expected for the job, careless the way young men in danger are always careless, like the danger is a story that happens to someone else. 6 days was the assignment. 4 is what got delivered. The dark didn't make it easier to say. If anything, it made it worse. No face to watch, no reaction to brace against, just a voice going out into the emptiness and staying there, the words hanging in air that smelled like machine oil and old stone. A judgment call. 90 seconds of being wrong, nothing in most rooms, less than this conversation, and the entire difference between a man who has a life and a man who doesn't.
You've carried that alone, he said.
Not a question. I don't carry things any other way.
That's the job. That's not the job, he said.
That's a woman who decided a long time ago that mourning is a luxury she isn't allowed. My throat did something complicated at that, tight and hot and unfamiliar. Something refused even a private name, and the dark that hid whatever my face was doing earned brief, fierce gratitude. He didn't reach for me. He didn't offer the kind of comfort that would have made me flinch away from it. He simply stood there, close enough to feel the warmth radiating off him despite everything, and let the silence hold what had been said without trying to fix it. I've buried people too, he said after a while. Longer than you've been alive. Probably longer than your country has existed. You'd think it gets easier. It doesn't. It just gets quieter. You learn to carry it without anyone hearing the sound it makes. His voice, unseen in the dark, still landed somewhere the chest could feel, something easing slightly, not because the grief was gone, but because for the first time in 10 years, someone else was standing inside it too instead of asking for it explained from outside. That, more than the warmth of him, more than the fact of his hand not far from mine, was the thing not allowed to be wanted in a long time. Steady hands, quiet, almost to myself. What? He asked. It's what gets told to myself, before anything dangerous, before anything that matters. Steady hands. The only prayer left worth keeping. He didn't say anything to that.
He didn't need to.
Closer in the dark. Not touching, just close enough that the space between us stopped feeling like distance and started feeling like something else, something without a safe name yet. Then, above them, metal groaned. The lift lurched, shuddered, and began to move again, slow at first and then faster, climbing toward whatever floor someone else had decided they should reach. Neither spoke. Whatever had opened in the dark stayed open, unspoken, folded carefully away for later the way you fold something not ready to be looked at again yet. The doors ground apart. Light spilled in, pale and yellow, from a corridor that should have been empty. Service floor, no guests, no reason for anyone to be standing there at this hour. Someone was. 4 men in dark coats, weapons already raised, faces unreadable in the flat overhead light, standing exactly where they needed to stand to make sure neither of them walked out of that corridor the way they had walked in. Moving came before thinking finished, the only way survival has ever worked in a corridor like that one. Down, and a body dropped low behind a linen cart abandoned mid-shift. Towels still folded in perfect stacks, someone's ordinary Tuesday interrupted by a war they didn't know was coming. The first shot took the cart apart overhead, splinters biting a cheek, registered the way weather gets registered. Present. Not important yet. Exits were already being counted, the corridor's angles catalogued the way every room gets catalogued, old habit refusing to switch off even now. Jefferson didn't drop. He met the first man head-on, closing the distance in 2 strides that shouldn't have been possible for something built like him, and put him through the wall hard enough that plaster rained down over both of them in a fine, chalky snow. The second man went down to 2 shots, the third to bare hands, close work, ugly work, the kind that leaves bruises found 3 days later with no memory of earning them. Then it was quiet. The particular quiet that comes after violence, ringing and wrong. One pulse the loudest thing in the hallway. "There's a passage," Jefferson said, still catching his breath, pointing toward an unmarked door at the corridor's end. "Old cellars. My family used them for wine before they used them for anything else." The idea sat badly. Going down meant somewhere unscouted, somewhere impossible to map the way every room usually gets mapped. Staying up here meant staying exactly where 4 men had already known to find them, and bad math has always been trusted less than unfamiliar ground. "Lead the way," and the words came out sounding like faith, which felt strange to hear from my own mouth. The stairs were narrow, stone-worn in the center from centuries of feet, and the air changed on the way down, warmer, older, carrying the ghost of oak and something fermented that had soaked into the walls 100 years before either of them was born. His shoulders were tight in a way not seen from him all night. "You don't like it down here." "I haven't been down here since I was a child," he said. "My mother used to bring me." She said the old stone remembered things the new buildings had forgotten. "Comforting," echoed back, his own word from the kitchen returned, and something in him eased slightly at that. The way people do when someone hands their fear back to them wrapped in something lighter. The cellar opened into a low, vaulted room lined with racks that hadn't held bottles in decades, empty slots like missing teeth stretching into shadow further than the light reached. A single bulb buzzed somewhere overhead, throwing more shadow than light. A voice came from the dark before the man attached to it did. "Your Majesty," said a voice recognized from earlier in the evening, from the perimeter he'd been guarding with what had looked like loyalty. Captain Reinhold stepped into the bulb's weak circle of light, sidearm already raised. Not at her. At Jefferson. "I need you to stand very still," Reinhold said, steady in a way that told of rehearsal, more than once, in his own head. Jefferson didn't move. "I have known you 11 years, he said, quiet, almost gentle, the way you'd speak to someone hoping might still turn back from a ledge. 11 years I've watched them push you toward mercy, while the families that keep this city fed starve for one of the old ways," Reinhold said. "This isn't personal. I want you to know that. It's entirely personal," and a small step sideways drew his eye half a degree away from Jefferson, buying inches meant to be spent. Reinhold's gun swung wide, exactly what was wanted, and exactly how close that want came to costing everything. The contract said protect the principal. It never said anything about protecting the men who were supposed to be protecting him too, and for one cold second a choice most operatives never have to make out loud arrived: spend a bullet on the traitor, or spend a breath trying to save something in him worth saving. The bullet won. Jefferson moved at the same instant the shot fired, faster than the shot, faster than sense, putting his own body between her and the captain's returning aim, without a flicker of hesitation, without doing the arithmetic she would have done in his place. Reinhold went down. Jefferson didn't. They stood over him in the ringing silence that followed, both breathing hard, both aware of how close that particular math had come to costing one of them everything. Hands weren't shaking. That should have brought more comfort than it did. "You didn't have to do that." "Neither did you," he said. "Yet here we both are." Kneeling beside Reinhold's body found what had already been suspected, a leather satchel strapped across his chest, heavier than a man running for his life would carry unless it mattered more than his own survival. Inside it, a ledger, handwritten, careful, the kind of careful that only exists when someone believes no one will ever read it. Numbers. Transfers. Dates going back months, longer than tonight's plot had any right to exist. One finger traced the entries while Jefferson crouched close enough to feel the warmth of him along one shoulder, close enough to feel him go still before the name surfaced. It wasn't a stranger's name. It was initials, elegant, old-fashioned, the kind of hand-taught penmanship before penmanship stopped mattering. W.A. 3 letters, appearing at the top of every page, authorizing every transfer, every weapon, every man sent to kill a king in his own house tonight. Jefferson went very quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't peace. "I know that hand," he said. No question got asked about whose it was. It showed in the way his jaw had gone tight, in the way his whole body had shifted from the man who'd just put himself between her and a bullet to something colder, something that had already started grieving something it hadn't lost yet. There's a particular stillness that only arrives when someone recognizes a betrayal before they're ready to say its name out loud, and it had been seen once before, on my own face, in a mirror stopped looking into after Prague. "We need to get out of this cellar," he said, and his voice had a crack running through it now, hairline, barely audible, the kind only someone who'd spent the last hour learning the sound of his composure would catch. It got heard anyway. Steady hands, and a hand reached for his without asking whether he wanted it, and he let it happen, which told everything the ledger hadn't. His hand was still there when the adrenaline finally let go, all at once, the way it always does, like a fist unclenching after holding something too tight for too long. The legs asked to sit, and an overturned crate answered, a body too experienced to argue with itself once it finally spoke up. Jefferson lowered himself beside her, careful of the shoulder Lorenzo hadn't touched but something else had, a graze not noticed until now, dark against the white of his ruined shirt. "You're bleeding." "It's nothing," he said, which is what men like him always say, king or not, century or two. Some things about pride never change. A strip torn from the hem of my own dress found its way to the wound anyway, no permission asked. He let it happen. That told more than the ledger had. They sat like that a while, surrounded by empty racks and the smell of old wood and older wine, the single bulb overhead humming its tired, dying hum. Somewhere far above the city was still turning, cars moving through wet streets, people ordering last drinks in bars that had no idea a king's own mother had just tried to bury him. Neither spoke down here. The silence did what silence is supposed to do, hold the shape of everything too large to say out loud yet. W.A. turned over again in the mind the way you turn a stone looking for the sharp edge. Not a rival house. Rivals don't have access to a captain of the guard. Rivals don't know security rotations down to the minute. Jefferson didn't answer right away. Watching him not answer meant watching the muscle along his jaw work the way it does when a man already knows the sum and is only delaying the moment he has to say it out loud. It's someone inside. Someone who's been inside long enough to build all of this without anyone questioning why. "I know," he said, quiet enough to almost lose under the hum of the bulb. No push came. Some truths need a person to arrive at them on their own, in their own time, a lesson learned the hard way about what happens when you drag someone toward a conclusion before they're ready to stand under the weight of it. Instead, he asked something unexpected. "What do you do," he said, "when this is over? Not the next contract. Not the next city. What does your life look like when nobody's shooting at you?" A laugh broke, short and surprised, the question landing somewhere untouched in years. Questions about rate, training, whether a miss had ever happened, those came often enough. Nobody in a decade had asked what I wanted for myself once the danger stopped needing me. I don't know, and it was the truest thing said all night. So long spent surviving jobs that nothing ever got built for after them. An apartment in Zurich, slept in maybe 40 nights total. A garden meant to be planted and never planted. What would you plant? He asked, and the question was so plain, so unguarded, that it undid something faster than anything else had tonight. Lavender. My grandmother grew it. I used to think it smelled like being safe. He looked over then, really looked, the way no client ever looks at the woman keeping him alive, and for one unguarded second an apartment that wasn't a waypoint got imagined, a garden that actually grew something, a version of this life that didn't end when the contract did. I want to see it, he said. The garden. Whatever it turns into. That's not something you say to your bodyguard, half warning, half something without a name yet. I'm not saying it to my bodyguard, he said. The air between us had gone thin and close, the kind of quiet that asks a question neither of us was brave enough to answer out loud. The old rule rose in my chest, the one about first names, about contracts, about never staying anywhere long enough to plant a single lavender seed, and for the first time in 10 years it loosened instead of holding. Then the dark at the far end of the cellar moved. Not a shadow shifting with the bulb's flicker. A person. Deliberate steps on old stone. Unhurried. The particular confidence of someone who has never once in their long life had to enter a room quickly. Jefferson went rigid beside her before her head had even turned. Mother, he said, and the word came out of him broken in a way not heard from him all night. Not fear. Not the careful control he'd worn like armor through every ambush, but something worse. Something closer to grief arriving before the body it belonged to had even finished dying. She stepped into the bulb's weak light, tall, composed, dressed as though she'd stepped out of the gala upstairs rather than down into a cellar full of blood. Not a hair out of place, not a single line of her gown disturbed by the war that had just torn through her son's world. Her eyes found the ledger still open on the crate between them, then found her son's face, and something in her expression didn't flinch at all. You were never meant to see that, she said, her voice cool as the stone around them. You did this, Jefferson said. Not a question. A man confirming a wound he'd already felt open, standing in the exact spot where a boy who trusted his mother's stories about old stone had once stood, learning something he could never unlearn. I did what your father would have done, she said. What every regent before you understood, and you refuse to learn. Mercy is not a crown, Thomas. Mercy is a door you leave open for the wolves. Something went very still beside me, the stillness of a man standing at the exact center of the worst night of his life, discovering the wolf had always been inside the house, sitting at his own table, wearing a face he'd trusted since before he could speak. Steady hands, and the hand reached for the blade at my hip without leaving her eyes. The body already doing the math the heart hadn't caught up to yet, already weighing what it would cost him to watch someone do what needed doing to the only mother he had left. My hand was still on the blade when the cellar filled with more of them. 6, maybe 7, stepping out from behind the racks where they'd clearly been waiting the whole time, weapons already up, faces recognized now as belonging to men posted around the residence all evening, wearing the crest that had once meant safety. The pulse didn't spike the way it should have. Adrenaline had run out hours ago. What was left was colder than fear, steadier, the particular calm that only arrives once a body has decided it will do what needs doing regardless of the cost. Wilhelmina didn't flinch at her own reinforcements. She simply watched, the way you watch a play you've already seen the ending of. Kill them both, she said, calm as ordering tea. My son has made his choice. Now, he can share the consequence of it. The old instinct moved first, but Jefferson's hand closed over my wrist, not stopping the motion exactly, redirecting it, and something in his grip said this wasn't the moment for my blade. This is mine, he said, quiet, final. He stood. Slowly, the way a king stands when done asking permission from anyone, including the woman who raised him. I have spent my whole life letting you decide what mercy costs me, he said, his voice carrying through the cellar with a weight not heard from him all night. Not fear, not grief anymore, something that had burned clean through both and come out the other side as something harder. Tonight, that ends. The first man came at him without a moment's hesitation waited from anyone. He moved with a speed that erased the exhaustion climbing his shoulders all night, met the attack head-on, and for the first time since the ballroom, understanding arrived that this wasn't a man surviving a threat. This was a king remembering what he actually was. The second man fell, then the third, the body doing the arithmetic the mind was too busy to run, blade finding gaps, hands finding pressure points, the particular economy of 10 years spent learning exactly how little force it takes to end a threat when you know where to place it. Jefferson reached his mother's last guard, and didn't kill him. Disarmed him with a single brutal motion and let him drop, choosing, in the middle of the worst night of his life, exactly which violence was necessary and which wasn't. Then, it was just the three of them. Wilhelmina hadn't moved. Hadn't reached for a weapon of her own, hadn't tried to run, standing in the ruin of her own plan with an expression that hadn't cracked once, chin level, spine straight, a woman who had ruled 2 centuries by never once letting anyone watch her flinch. "You'd let a stranger's blood on the floor of this house before you'd let me finish what I started," she said, her voice carrying a coldness that hadn't been there upstairs, in the gala, when she'd smiled at guests and called herself proud of her son. "She's not a stranger," Jefferson said. "She's the reason I'm alive to be having this conversation with you at all." Something landed under my ribs at that, sharper than anything Wilhelmina's men had thrown all night. "You're going to let her walk out of here believing she matters," his mother said, her composure finally showing the first hairline crack. "She's a contract, Thomas. When this is over, she'll take her fee and disappear, the way people like her always do." The old, practiced line about the job being the job sat ready, and it wouldn't come out. The words that used to protect me from exactly this moment had gone quiet somewhere in a stalled elevator, in a wine cellar, in the particular silence of a man asking what I'd plant in a garden I'd never let myself want. Jefferson didn't wait for those words to be found.
"She's not leaving," he said.
"Not because I'm keeping her. Because I'm asking her to stay, in front of you, in front of everyone left standing in this house tonight. So there's no version of this story where you get to pretend you didn't hear it." The cellar held its breath. Something complicated and enormous moved through my chest, a feeling with no name yet and no need for one to be forced onto it. "Guards, secure her," Jefferson said, not looking away from his mother even as 2 of his own men, the ones who hadn't turned, stepped forward to take her by the arms. "There will be a trial. You'll answer for tonight the way anyone else in this city would." Wilhelmina's face, for the first time all night, showed something close to fear, not of the men holding her, but of a son who had finally stopped needing her approval to become who he was always going to be. They led her away. The cellar emptied slowly, guards and staff filtering out into the corridors above, until it was just the 2 of them again, standing in wreckage that smelled like old wine and gunpowder and something that might have been the beginning of a different life. "I don't know what to say to you," admitted honestly, 10 years of careful distance gone useless in my hands. "Then don't say anything yet," he said. "Just stay long enough to find out if you want to." Prague came to mind. The contract never closed. The man who couldn't be saved, the decades spent making sure caring enough about anyone to lose them that way again never happened. Lavender came to mind too. "I'm staying," and the words landed somewhere nothing had been allowed to land in 10 years, solid, permanent, entirely unlike the careful, temporary things usually permitted. He reached for my hand, not asking, not needing to, and it got taken. "Steady hands," he said, quiet, like he'd been listening the whole time, like he understood exactly what he was being handed and intended to hold it with the same care spent a decade refusing to ask for. "There are other women in this city who almost made the choice made tonight. Not all of them get mornings like this one. If tonight found something in you, stay close. This is where we keep count of the ones who did, and the ones still fighting to." Above them, the first light of dawn was already finding the tall windows of the residence, gold and quiet and entirely undeserved after a night like this one. The stairs got climbed beside him toward it anyway, hand in hand, boots still stained with a night neither of them would ever fully explain to anyone who hadn't lived it, choosing, for the first time in longer than could be counted, to walk towards something instead of away from it. Somewhere behind the Munich was still Munich, cars moving, church bells beginning their slow morning count, entirely unaware of how close it had come to waking up with a different king, or none at all. Ahead of them the whole rest of it waited, unscheduled, unplanned, the first stretch of a life that hadn't already been mapped an exit from.